and competitive advantage for
Thank
our
you very
country.
much, Minister Monsef. The time has expired. We're now moving over to Nellie Shen for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Minister Monsef, the most haunting statement I heard from the witnesses yesterday was from Lorraine Whitman, an elder with the Glooscap First Nation in Nova Scotia and president of Native Women's Association of Canada. She essentially said that the Indigenous community is hurt because they made themselves vulnerable by telling their stories with a good faith that the government was going to follow through with their promise of action on the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, but didn't. There's deep disappointment. I'd like to say it's simply wrong to toy with people's pain and make them relive their trauma over and over as they retell their story, and then crush their hope by not following through. This is another barrier that brings us backward in the process of reconciliation. Indigenous communities already struggle with hope. We see it in the high cases of youth suicide. The final report on the National Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls was meant to be released in June, and the government has used COVID as an excuse to delay the release. What is the government's plan if we get a second wave? And this is a matter of justice, restoring trust, and being serious about reconciliation. When can these communities expect the final report? Thank you.
Thank you for that very important question. As a student activist, when the Prime Minister of Canada in the previous government said that the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls was not a priority, that was crushing. We are moving forward to respond to the calls for justice, and my colleagues, including Minister Bennett and I, have been working with Indigenous communities across the country. We held gatherings, virtual gatherings with the province of Yukon, with Manitoba, for example. The work is ongoing. COVID has changed things, but we heard clear from families, from survivors, from Indigenous leaders, nothing for us without us, and we are co-developing that response. I will also say we didn't wait to respond. We've already invested historic amounts in women's organizations supporting Indigenous communities across the country. We are already working to close gaps, the K-12 education gap, for example, the cap on funding, that was removed. Over half of the boiled water advisories have been removed. Sex discrimination in the Indian Act has been removed. We've put forward legislation around Indigenous languages and supports for children in care and restoring those rights back to those families. Some hundreds of millions of dollars have been invested directly in response to COVID.
Minister,
we have a long way to go, and more
I'd
will
like to
be
ask
done.
another very important question. How will the minister protect Indigenous women and children in abusive homes now and if there is a second wave? Because many have repeatedly said that they are more afraid of domestic violence than they are of COVID.
And they have every reason to be afraid. They are disproportionately affected by gender-based violence, and we as a country are going to benefit when our communities are safer for Indigenous women and girls. I will say, MP Shin, it's not if there will be a second wave, it's how the second wave or the third wave will look and where it will be hit hardest. In Indigenous communities, where there has been containment effort, where communities have been in charge of their own health services, able to share their data, they've been able to respond really effectively, and I want to thank them for that. We are going to continue to support those who are providing shelters, for example, for Indigenous women and girls on reserve and off reserve. We are going to continue to ensure they are at the table and that we are hearing directly from them. And we are going to continue to ensure that they benefit from the various government supports that are in place right now so that they are not made even more vulnerable because of COVID. This is work that provinces and territories are also committed to, and I'm grateful to see that in 2020 this is multi-party support. There's multi-party support for this work because Indigenous communities for too long have been let down by governments. We can do better, and we will.
So I thank you for that. I would just like to know what is the long-term plan then for the, as you say, the next wave and whatever that will look like, and the long term, because this is a cycle that needs to be broken.
Unfortunately, it's are we